Hey there, you lovely people. How wonderful to have you here in the shed with me, in the holy shed, a little place of refuge at the bottom of the garden. And you know what? I'm really pleased at the response I've been getting to my little shedlets, my baby shedcast, especially the one that I did this week about forgiving ourselves. I mean, I've been moved by people telling me about their own struggles with this particular subject and how helpful they found the words that I gave about it, which is fantastic. I mean, what seems to be particularly helpful from comments that people have made is what I said about asking forgiveness from someone who is no longer with us, someone who's died, because this I think is often a problem that people feel regret that they didn't sort something out, they hurt someone, and they always meant to put it right, but then the person dies, and hey, it seems like you're stuffed then. And I made the suggestion that you can still speak to that person, you can still express what you feel, perhaps by writing a letter to the person even though she or he is dead. Maybe find a space somewhere, a quiet space to read the letter out loud to the person, and then get rid of it. I mean, that's what I'd always say. Never keep anything that you've written down like that because it'll always be there. It'll haunt you. So it's good to burn it or get rid of it, get it out of the way. I remember once, visiting a man who was deeply troubled by something that he'd done to his brother, who was now long dead. And the guilt about this had haunted him, just hung over like a great cloud for years. And I was seeing him at a particularly low time in his life, and he told me about this. And I said, "Well, why don't you speak to your brother now?" So he said, "Well, he's dead." I said, "Yeah, but you can still do that." So there and then, with me present, he expressed to his brother what he had been feeling and the regret at stuff that had happened. And while he was speaking, all of a sudden, he kind of yelled out and grabbed his neck like this. And I said, "What's wrong? What's happened?" So he said, "For all the years that I can remember," he said, "I've had this like a knot in my neck, and it's just always been there and irritated me." And suddenly he said, and he wriggled his neck around, he said, "It's gone. It's gone." Well, I don't understand that, I mean, I'm not a kind of spooky type of person, really, but I absolutely believe that there's a strong connection between body and mind, and that sometimes we can carry around in our body emotions that are unresolved, guilt or shame or sorrow or whatever. And I think it's really important to find ways to let go of these emotions. And forgiving ourselves is a really important thing in life to do because it's about taking your life off hold in that particular area and being able to move on to, wake up really to your life as it is. So that's great. On a lighter note, there have been some lovely late November days this week, certainly down here where we are. And on earlier on the week, I posted some pictures of a walk that we had around nearby Chard Reservoir, which some of you know we like to frequent as often as we can, really. Um, and we were there just as the day ended, and this is one of the pictures that I took and put on Facebook, which a lot of people seem to like. And I have to say, I didn't mess around with this picture. That is what it was like, really. Just absolutely amazing. And I think probably my favourite one, which was a bit earlier in the afternoon, was this one, which I love this so much really because it just epitomises this time of year when all the greenery is gone from the trees and so on, and they just look like they've been kind of drawn up there with a nice sharp pencil, and that lovely tone in the sky, the reflections, absolutely fantastic. I love it so much. So before we go further, I'd like to share a sort of seasonal poem with you, really. I know I force feed you Mary Oliver, but it is another one by her, I'm afraid. And I love it so much. It's It's called Lines Written in the Days of Growing Darkness, and it goes like this. Every year we've been witness to it, how the world descends into a rich mash in order that it may resume. And therefore, who would cry out to the petals on the ground to stay, knowing as we must, how the vivacity of what is married to the vitality of what will be? I don't say it's easy, but what else will we do? If the love one claims to have for the world be true, so let us go on, cheerfully enough, this and every crisping day, though the sun be swinging east, and the ponds be cold and black, and the sweets of the year be doomed. Isn't that fantastic? I love that line there, knowing as we must how the vivacity of what was is married to the vitality of what will be. And, it's a little bit really as if we are poised right now at one of those points, isn't it? A liminal point where we're looking back longingly for a lot of what was before this pandemic hit us. Not everything, but a lot of it. But we're also, especially with the promise of vaccinations, looking forward to what will be beyond it. So we're going to light a candle now. If you've got one handy, that would be brilliant. Let's light a candle really about that very line, thinking about the thing that has gone, but also reaching out for that which lies before, the promise of hope. And in the spirit of that, let us say the Shed Serenity Prayer together. God, grant me the serenity to live fully and generously through circumstances I cannot control. Hope to keep on imagining better times for myself and the world. And courage to change what I can instead of simply leaving it to others. Amen. So this is Advent Sunday, the start of the journey toward Christmas, certainly in the Christian calendar at least. I love Advent, I love it for lots of reasons. But perhaps above all, I'm sad really that it gets such short shrift alongside its tinselly companion, Christmas. And actually part of my love of Advent is my great affection for this month, actually, the month of December, which I think is a much underrated month, really, largely because it gets overshadowed by Christmas. And so I reckon it's time to redeem December from Christmas and to rediscover the beauty of Advent, the art of waiting, which is also what I think December is a lot about. So look, over the next few weeks, we'll certainly chew over lots of the issues connected to Christmas. Virginity, God in a shed, interfaith birth. What if Mary had given birth to a bonny girl instead of a bouncy boy? The politics of the story. There's so many things there for us to pick over in the days that lie ahead. But today, we're going to focus really on the stuff connected to Advent and to dark December and to the pagan soul, which we contemplated last week, which I think penetrates both of these subjects. I've already said that for me, the pagan soul, when I use that phrase, it's the pagan soul is about a deep connectedness with nature, an instinctive sense of belonging to the earth. But this isn't just a pagan thing. I see this as really a deeply Christian thing too, though all too often it doesn't turn out that way. A lot of popular Christian spirituality frequently appears intent, I think, on alienating us from this world in favor of another world elsewhere, a heavenly home in the sky, whatever. So this precious earth of ours lands up being a mere stage for the drama of the human story instead of the treasure that it is in and of itself. The focus, we're led to believe, is up there instead of down here. And I think that's all so wrong. And, rather appropriately, I reckon, the Holy Shed is in a garden. It really is. It's grounded here in the midst of nature. And I like that because the Holy Shed stands, amongst other things, for holy worldliness, for an earthy, messy, get your hands dirty kind of spirituality. The sacrament of nature, the sacrament of physicality of the material universe. A sacrament, by the way, is something ordinary and physical, which communicates or mediates the divine, not just in a special religious context like, bread and wine and communion, but actually in the ordinary run of everyday life. But as I say, much of what we experience in religion, I think, propagates a sort of spirituality of estrangement in which we're led to see the physical, material, earthly realm as something to escape or rise above in order to encounter God in a transcendent spiritual realm. And to me, this isn't truly Christian at all. It actually stems, I think, from Gnostic influences in the early church, which viewed the physical material world as essentially sinful or evil. It's an influence, however, which is still very active. It's still pervading an awful lot of popular Christian spirituality. But, and here's the good news, another deeper, more profound strand of Christian spirituality exists, what I call a spirituality of belonging, a vision of encountering the divine in and through the physical, material world. And this is a truly sacramental approach that identifies the divine God as an immanent or intrinsic presence within the physical world. It's an approach really which traces back to Judaism, really. It's rooted in Judaism, which is a very this worldly tradition where the goodness of the earth is still maintained. It's the vision definitely within the Hebrew scriptures that Jesus read and inherited. A spirituality of belonging that I'm describing certainly provides fertile ground for interfaith relations with pagan friends. And December, for us in the north anyway, June for people down under, is an important month for pagans because it provides in a way its own sort of Advent, really, when the world is waiting patiently for the sun to return, for light and warmth to come again. But I think what's often overlooked, is the waiting itself, the beauty of pausing, of watching, of inhabiting the darkness with hope, but also discovering the magnificence of the darkness itself. Faith is mostly associated with light, isn't it? And yet, the scriptures tell us, and the psalmist, for instance, affirms that God created dark as well as light, winter as well as summer, cold as well as warmth. And each of these things has its place in the big scheme of things. I think that we've been misled by a false opposition between darkness and light, in which light is good and darkness is bad. And yes, there is an element of that certainly in scripture, and it's a kind of perhaps a useful metaphor. But when it's overplayed, as I think it massively is, we lose the glory of dark. The glory of dark, which, for example, is expressed in a magnificent poem called Night by Henry Vaughan, which says this. It says, "There is in God, some say, a deep but dazzling darkness." Wow, that takes a bit of contemplating, doesn't it? There is in God, some say, a deep but dazzling darkness. I love that. Writing about the virtues of this time of year, of autumn winter, Parker Palmer, who I often quote, observes that when we so fear the dark that we demand light all the time, that everything's supposed to be light around the clock, there can only be one result: artificial light, which he says is glaring and graceless and beyond its borders. And he says that darkness actually grows more terrifying the more we try to hold it off. And we spend quite a lot of our life, not just in the physical terms of physical darkness, but the dark areas of our lives are things that we often try to avoid and stave off. And he says the more we do that, the more terrifying it becomes. When we split off darkness and light from each other, it becomes something which he says isn't fit for human habitation. But the moment we say yes to both of them and join their paradoxical dance together, the two conspire to make us healthy and whole. And so I think that's an amazing thought, isn't it? I love the idea that the dance of darkness and light conspire to make us healthy and whole, because I think a full and contented life incorporates paradox. It's right at the heart of it all, really, because life in all its forms is basically quite paradoxical. Ancient Chinese philosophy speaks of this, of course, famously in the yin yang symbol that we're all familiar with now. Sadly, too often we're familiar with it just as a sort of trinket that you wear around your neck or something. And yet this symbol oozes wisdom about the centrality of paradox, the enigma of light and dark, that light is always present in darkness, darkness is always embedded in light. Now, as lots of you know, I am an Enneagram Type 7, which is the sunniest of all personalities. I love positive, upbeat, sunny moods. I like summertime. I love light. And to be honest, I've always been, quite frightened of the dark, actually. And one of the places I've been confronted with that is the cottage that we rented for 30 years in Yorkshire, which I've talked about on other occasions. There we are in a lovely wintry scene at the cottage. And various pictures here. It's the place, actually, where this lovely photograph of Pat was taken, which a lot of you have liked on Facebook. The cottage was a place of many candles because perched in the middle of a valley, a mile from the nearest road, with no electricity, it could get very dark at night. I have on numerous occasions lain on the frosty ground outside just so I could gaze up at the crisp sky with the Milky Way visible in a way it sort of never is really in the city. And I've awoken in the middle of the night there when the bedroom fire has gone out, because we'd always light a fire in the bedroom. I mean, in a fireplace, not just like on the floor. And I'd wake up when the fire's gone out, and here I am now, desperate for a pee. And it's so dark I can't even see my hand in front of my face. I mean, Pat, she's fine with dark. She's always been fine with dark. But me, I kind of cuddle up to her to feel safe and to try and ignore the fact that I need to go and have a wee. But of course, in the end, your bladder gets the better of you and there's no resisting. So I would hurry along this dark corridor, grasping onto my candle and then getting back as soon as possible to that warm, safe bed huddled up to Pat. But over the years of going there, the cottage taught me to embrace that dark. It was a place where I also had to learn patience, because there's no hurrying in a place like that. I mean, it really was much more living by the rhythms of nature around us than when you're kind of in the city. So I learned a little, and I say a little, about patience and waiting, as well as embracing the darkness. And with no TV to watch, I recall sitting numerous times by the fire on a winter afternoon, reading until the light outside died away, and books had to be set aside, and we'd sit there in the room as it sank into darkness with just the flickering of the fire in the room. Absolutely amazing. And I'm sure lots of you have read the story in How to Be a Bad Christian about the time that our friend Stuart, who was a Royal Marines chaplain at the time, asked me to take him or to lead him on a spiritual retreat, and clearly the cottage was the ideal place for this. Pat came along too because, hey, she would never miss a chance to be at the cottage. And, she's always got plenty of wise retreating thoughts to contribute. And so we retreated up and down the valley each day with the dogs. And there we are, just, me looking a little bit over affectionate towards Stuart. We'd retreat up and down the valley every day with the dogs. We'd retreat to the pub in the evening for food and sustenance because, it's hard work, all this retreating. We spent time talking and reflecting and gazing at the hillside opposite. We prayed and we kept silence in front of the fire. We also played the odd hand of cards and sipped some port. And on our last evening, after Stuart's wife Laura joined us, we decided to say prayers outside. It had been a lovely, crisp, late autumn day, and we had a fire outdoors all afternoon. By 5:45, it was dark, but still quite mild. So we huddled together outside with just enough light from the fire to read our prayer books. And as we prayed, two owls repeatedly called to each other across the valley, and a delightfully slender quarter moon just about peeped over the hill opposite, not bright enough to obliterate the gradual unveiling of the Milky Way overhead. And I tell you, my Christian heart and my pagan soul sang praises together. When you think about it, you can understand how our ancestors felt about winter when dark, cold months closed in, extinguishing life all around and threatening their own very existence in those days. They lit fires, they huddled together, they told stories, they ate the fruits of the harvest, and they laughed and they danced and they made merry, and they longed for the sun to return, and yet they embraced the darkness of now, knowing that waiting is part of the deal. Life is a paradox, a cycle of events. What goes around comes around. Life is a both and rather than an either or experience. And I ask you, dear friends, is there anything more sublime than a summer day in the garden with a barbie, a cold beer or a glass of white or a nice cup of tea in your hand? But on the other hand, is there any sight or sound on earth as exquisite as that hushed descent of a skyful of snow, transforming and cleansing the tired world all around? Church officials decided in the 4th century to make December the 25th the birthday of Jesus, almost certainly to coincide with Saturnalia, the week-long Roman celebration of the winter solstice. Probably because actually the winter feast was very popular with Roman citizens who they wanted to convert, and so they needed to baptize it and build it in. Either way, I love it that the birth of Jesus is embedded, up here in the north at least, in a season of waiting and longing. It's why, both in terms of nature and of faith, Advent is a season of shades, many shades, of light and dark, of balance or equilibrium between the two, of yin and yang, if you like, a spirituality and a faith of belonging, of being rooted in this lovely Mother Earth. In the upper Midwest of the States, where Parker Palmer is from, the winters are hard, and he says newcomers often receive a classic piece of wintertime advice, which is this: the winters will drive you crazy until you learn to get out into them. And so they pay a lot of money to have, gear that they can wear to go out into the outsides and avoid the cabin fever that comes from just sitting around in a fire indoors forever. And he says that you soon learn that a daily walk into the winter world will fortify the spirit by taking you to the very heart of the season that you most fear and wish to get past. And maybe this is what Advent is really teaching us, the need to get out into the cold and darkness, not just the physical darkness, but the darkness of things we fear and that we try to avoid. Maybe that's what Advent's saying. Embrace the darkness. Confront the issues within yourself. Tackle your own demons. Spend some time embracing the darkness, or rather letting it embrace us. Umpteen nights lying awake in bed at the cottage eventually, as I say, got through to me. I opened my eyes, eventually in the pitch darkness, allowed it to enfold me like a warm blanket, and then I discovered, as someone said, that in a dark time, the eyes begin to see. I've never been great with darkness, as I say. I've always been pretty awful at waiting, as my wife will tell you. So take it from one who knows. There are life-giving lessons to be learned out there in those waiting times, in the darkest experiences of life. And it's important for us to embrace them. So hey, we're going to say a prayer now, which we've been using here in the shed. It's a shed prayer that is very pertinent to this before we toast the world and all that it gives us. So join me if you wish in saying, thank you, loving God, for the wonder of this world, for the sheer joy in being part of it. Thank you for bodies fashioned from dirt, which shall to dirt return. Thank you for passionate desires that bring excitement and pleasure, for senses to smell and hear and taste. Thank you for friends to weep and laugh with, for food that sustains, for drink to make merry. Thank you for this magnificent earth, which is our home. Amen. Wonderful. So if you've got a drink near at hand, I invite you right now to pour a little drop out, whatever it is that you've got. And I invite you to join me. Now, dear friends, join me in toasting the glorious gift of life in all its beauty and diversity. Let's toast new beginnings. Let's toast a future of love and justice and health for ourselves, for our neighbours, for our magnificent planet. So please raise your glasses with me and say, to life, l'chaim. Beautiful. Okay, so if you like what I'm doing, as you know, you're very welcome to buy me a coffee. There is a link at the top of the posts on the Shed Facebook where you can go to a lovely site, Ko-fi, spelled K-O-F-I, buy us a coffee or two. You'll also find there's a shop part which has got most of my books are there on sale, and if you want, I will sign them, dedicate them to anybody that you choose. You just need to send me a message on Facebook or post it somewhere, send me an email, and before we send the book out to you, I'll do a little signing just for you. Excellent. So we're going to come to our final blessing, which actually is a picture once again of that lovely cottage in Yorkshire. It's looking into the living room, makes it look a lot more glamorous than it really was. But we say together, the blessing of God, the eternal goodwill of God, the shalom and salam of God, the wildness and warmth of God be among us and between us, now and always. Amen. So there it is, guys. Thank you so much for being with me in the shed again, and I look forward to this Advent in the shed season when we can pick over all those tricky little issues about Christmas. And if you've got some that you would particularly like me to address, please post it on my Facebook or on the Holy Shed, or send me a message or whatever, and I will certainly incorporate your questions into the things that we chew over in the next few weeks. So I'm going to leave you with a little piece of film of some ducks at Chard Reservoir, a little film I took earlier this week with a little bit of music. And it's a moment just to be still before you go on to whatever other wonderful things you're doing this evening. So have a good week. Look after yourselves. Go well, and I'll see you soon. Maybe in a little shedlet or two. See ya. Bye.